I'm Miss Stephanie from the Aloud Library, and I'm here to share with you the first chapter of Ice Wolves by Amy Kaufman. Ice Wolves is a 2021 nominee for the Rhode Island Middle School Book Awards. Ice Wolves, Chapter 1. Raina was confidently leading them in the wrong direction. Anders hurried through the crowd after her, ducking as a woman nearly sideswiped him with a basket of glistening fish. The stink washed over him like a cloud, and then he swerved away, leaving it behind as they ran through a stone arch. Raina, where? She was already turning the corner and running out across Helstustrat, nipping in front of a pair of chestnut ponies that were hauling a wagon full of barrels over the cobblestones. Anders jogged from one foot to the other, waiting as they rumbled past, and then took off after his twin sister again. Raina! She could hear him. He knew that when she flashed a quick grin over her shoulder, white teeth gleaming in her ground face. But that didn't slow her down, her thick black braid bouncing as she jogged. He was always stuck trying to catch up again. This always happened. Raina, he tried one final time, just as they rounded the corner to see the roadblock ahead, manned by guards clad in gray woolen uniforms. Without breaking stride, Raina whirled back the way they'd come, grabbing Anders by the arm and yanking him with her around the corner. His heart thumped at the close shave. He leaned back against the cool stone wall. Guards, she said, tugging her coat straight. I know. They're on every street, the north side of the city, he told her, checking everyone who comes through. Her gaze flicked back toward the corner. Was there an extra dragon sighting? Or were they doing extra patrols before the Ulfer trials? There was a dragon in the sky just last night, he replied. I heard them talking about it in the tavern when we were climbing down from the roof first thing. He didn't point out that Raina had missed the information because she'd been too busy telling him their plans for the day. They said they saw it breathe fire and everything. That silenced even Raina for a moment. Dragons had been gone from Hallbard for 10 years now, but lately they had been seen in the sky overhead. Anders and Raina had seen one themselves 6 months before on the night of the last equinox celebrations. It had breathed pure white fire as it circled above the city, then vanished into the darkness. An hour later, a set of stables in the north of the city was ablaze with the ferocious white and gold dragon's fire that was almost impossible to put out, leaping from one place to another, faster and fiercer than normal flames. By the time the buildings had been reduced to ashes, the dragon was gone, and with it the son of the family that lived above the stables. Dragons always took children, the story said, the weak, the sick, and the defenseless. Maybe the guards think the dragon from last night could still be spying in the city, hiding in human form, Anders said. Or planning to start a fire. Raina snorted. What? And they think if they ask people they're just going to admit they know where a dragon was, but decided not to tell anyone? He nodded, lowering his voice to do his best impression of an upstanding citizen. Yes, guard. In fact, I hide scorched dragons on my roof, because I want to be roasted alive and don't believe in public safety. I feel a little bit guilty about it, and I've been meaning to confess to somebody, but I wasn't sure who would want to know. At least you'd be warm, she giggled, kicking at a slushy, melting pile of snow. He returned to his own voice, her giggle helping chase away his own nerves as he hoped it would. You never know if you don't ask. But even though he smiled along with her, even the words put a twitch between his shoulder blades. Scorched dragons. They were the one thing every person in Hallbard knew to fear, whether they were locals or traders from across the sea. There were new rumors every day the dragons were near the city again. Rumors they'd burned a farmhouse to the ground just last week, the farmer's family still inside. How far south do we have to go to dodge the guards, Raina asked, jolting him from that thought. It went without saying they'd avoid them. Guards asked questions like, where are your parents? And other inconvenient things related to adult supervision. At least 10 streets, he replied. A couple of them were in wolf form, and I think they'd smell it if you were worried. 10 streets? That doubles the distance to Trelling Square. Anders, if you knew we were going in the wrong direction, why didn't you stop me? She was all indignation, hands on her hips. But he gave up before he started. Maybe he should have tried harder. But it was his fault they'd come the wrong way. I'm sorry, he settled on. But she was already moving again, heading south. We'll go over the rooftops. He was tall and gangly to her short and strong. Though the twins shared the same black curls and the warm brown skin, in almost every other way they were different. So being taller, Anders boosted Raina up until she could grab the guttering and haul herself onto the nearest roof. Then he scrambled onto a barrel and climbed after her. When she straightened up, he could see the rooftop meadows of Hallbard spread out before them. Each square of grass was at least 20 houses long and 20 wide, rising and falling with the pitch and slope of the roofs. The rooftops were covered in bright patches of wildflowers, red fentels tucked down in the gullies, yellow and white flamethrowers bobbing in the breeze on the slopes, as well as the occasional herb garden where someone had had a window big enough to climb out and tend their plants. Thanks to the children of Hobart, wherever there was only an alleyway between two stretches of grass rather than a wide street, a plank of wood almost always propped in place to serve as a bridge. You could travel half of the city up here without ever needing to set foot on the ground. Anders and Raina ran across the grass together, climbing over the tops of the sloped roofs. It only took them a few minutes to find Trelling Square, which wasn't as big as the larger town squares in fancier neighborhoods, or down by the docks, but was always guaranteed to be packed with shoppers. Below them, they could see at least 100 people doing their shopping at nearly 20 different stalls squeezed together, selling everything from flowers to eggs, secondhand clothes to hot sausages in bread. On a rooftop on the opposite side of the square, they saw Jarrow, a dark-haired, dark-eyed boy of about their age with pasty white skin hidden under a layer of dirt. He was a notorious pickpocket and ran with a couple of his brothers, who looked like smaller versions of himself. Today he studied Anders and Raina for a long moment and then turned away, apparently confident the twins weren't a threat. Down in the square, there was a puppet show setting up for one of the last performances before dusk fell. The players assembling the wooden box where they hide behind to work the puppets, while out front a self-playing harmonica sucked in wind and spat out tunes. It was an artifact, an invention that channeled essence or magic, and probably worth more than the rest of the puppet show put together. The twins flopped down on their fronts, propping up their chins on their elbows as the harmonica fell silent and the show began. They couldn't hear the voice of the performers from up here, but they could still tell which story it was. The troupe was performing the last great battle, the time 10 years before, when Anders and Raina had been toddlers, when the dragons had attacked Hobart and the Wolf Guard had defended the city. A bunch of little wooden human puppets jumped and danced across the stage, going about their business, blissfully ignorant of what was coming next. They were beautifully made, from creamy white polished pine through to the darkest mahogany. They were as varied as the citizens of Hobart, who stood watching the show. Anders heard gasps from the audience below when the red dragon puppets suddenly appeared, swooping low over the little people puppets who scattered and ran about the stage, bobbing up and down on their stick. One swooped to pick up the smallest puppet, kidnapping a child. How are they going to show? Raina began, but she got no further. Somehow, a dragon puppet breathed fire. Not a cascade of white and gold fabric or some silly trick, but real fire. The flames raced along the fabric of the puppet people's clothes, curling around each seam and enveloping the tiny figures until there was nothing left. How did they make it white? Raina whispered. And with those gold sparks. It looks like real dragon fire. It's a kind of salt, I think, he whispered back, and iron filings for the gold sparks. This is the best show we've ever seen. The puppets, who hadn't been reduced to ashes, ran around the stage even more frantically. Anders and Raina leaned over the edge of the roof in anticipation. They'd seen one tribe of shape-shifting elementals, the scorched dragons, making their attack, and now it was time for the other, the ice wolves, the heroes of the battle. Another set of human puppets popped up on the stage, all clad in gray, and Raina pointed. There's the Wolf Guard! Watch! Beneath the wooden box, the puppeteers worked some trick, and in the blink of an eye, the Wolf Guard puppets turned themselves inside out. And on the inside of the puppets was sewn their wolf form. Now, they were no longer guards in gray uniforms, but actual wolves, howling and creating spears of ice to drive out the dragons. The high-pitched noise was audible, even above the gasps of the crowd. Those are some fancy puppets, Anders said, as a pair of wolf guards, real, living ones, just like the pine puppet and the other like mahogany, walked through the square on patrol, and nodded their approval as the dragon puppet came crashing down, defeated. Another dropped the tiny kidnapped child puppet, and Anders winced. He wasn't sure making a dragon drop a child from a great height counted as a rescue, but he probably wasn't meant to be thinking about that. Sure are fancy, Raina agreed, but fancy puppets won't feed me dinner. When Anders looked over, she was pulling her fishing rod from inside her coat, screwing the sections together until the handle was complete, and taking up position at the edge of the building. There was a sausage seller right below them, a wizened little man, only his gray hair and thick green coat visible from Anders' vantage point. Raina lowered the hook, and when he wasn't looking, she carefully snagged one of the sausages. Below them, the crowd was still gasping over the end of the puppet show and handing out copper coins for the performers, arguing about how the dragon puppet had been made to breathe fire. Raina reeled the line back in quickly and carefully, swinging it around towards Anders, who unhooked the sausage. He rolled over onto his back and made it swim up and down like they caught a fish, or like it was one of the puppets below. "Don't play with your food," she laughed, looking down to see about getting another. It had been a genius idea of hers to use the fishing line. Nobody ever looked up for a thief. Well, it wasn't true these days that nobody ever looked up, not with the rumors about dragons in the skies again, but it was still better to think of better than thieving on the ground. They'd have to do that tomorrow to get their hands on some coins. Anders sometimes worried about the stealing, but Raina always shrugged. "There's no other way," she'd say. "We'll take care of us, and they can take care of them." Raina was frowning as the sausage seller handed off the last of his wares to a customer and began packing up his stall, and she dismantled her rod, wandering over to peer down the alleyway behind the rooftop. "Psst," she called, waving Anders across to join her a minute later. "Look at the window." With a sinking feeling, he crossed over, then leaned out to take a look. He was pretty sure he knew where this was heading. There was a little window down there, halfway open. "Raina, no way," he tried. "Your legs are long enough," she said, "and just think what might be inside." "A person," he said. "A person might be inside." She waved a hand in dismissal. "A window that small? No way does it lead to a main room. It'll be the bathroom or the pantry. Nobody'll see you." There were a dozen more arguments about why this was a bad idea, but Anders didn't bother making them. He knew how it would end, no matter what he said. So instead, sighing, he handed his coat to her, then lowered himself off the edge of the roof. He ended up dangling by his hands, his feet feeling around for the window ledge as Raina gave instructions, and he began to worry he'd have to let go. It was going to hurt if he landed on the cobblestones. Just as he was really starting to panic, he finally found the little ledge, getting both his feet onto it. He balanced carefully as he walked his hands down the stone wall until eventually he was low enough that he could feed himself in through the window. He landed lightly in what turned out to be a pantry, arms windmilling as he tried to avoid tipping over into the shelves lining the room. He stabilized and breathed out in relief. That relief lasted about 10 seconds before he heard the sound of the front door opening. The breeze it created pushed through the rooms, and when it reached Anders in the pantry, it slammed shut the window above him. He whirled around, reaching up to push it open again, but his heart was sinking even as he turned. Sure enough, the lock had clicked into place, and he didn't have the key. He stared at his lost escape route in horror. Why did these things always happen to him? Footsteps approached, and he spun back, searching the tiny space for a good spot to hide. After a couple of seconds of desperate considerations, he crammed himself behind a brown glazed pot almost as big as he was. He grabbed the lid off the pot, the brine of the pickled vegetables wafting up into his nose, and balanced it on the top of his head where he crouched. It was dark in the pantry, and he was lucky his warm brown skin would blend in with the pots around him, though in his experience, Anders was rarely lucky. The footsteps stopped outside the pantry door, which was still ajar. Through it, he could see a woman who looked like she wanted to stand out as much as she wanted to blend in. She wore a truly magnificent hat adorned with piles of expensive flowers. Her dress was large and purple and designed to take up lots of space, and she wore matching purple powder on her brown cheeks. She was clearly wealthy, and she had the haughty tilt of her chin as she leaned in to inspect herself in the hall mirror and adjust her hat. "That Dama Barrow," she said to herself, indignant, "and Dama Chardy. I'll show them whose sweet cakes are flat. We'll just see who's laughing at this next contest, won't we?" Anders stared at her. What was she talking about? How long was she going to take? And how was he going to get out of here? If she caught him, she'd report him to the wolf guard for sure. Just as he was trying to remind himself to breathe slowly, there came a knock at the front door. Seriously? The woman and her hat bustled away to answer, and a moment later he heard Raina's cheerful voice, though he couldn't make out her words. One thing you could say about Raina is that she always jumped in head first, whether or not she had a plan. Suddenly, the woman's voice grew nearer again. "I told you, I don't really want." Raina didn't let her get another word in edgewise, and suddenly Anders realized she'd forced her way into the house. "As I said, we're offering a free sausage today, to every house today, only as a sample of our wares. I think you'll find we sell the finest sausages in the city of Hallbard, Dama, perhaps in all of Valen." He watched as Raina strode past the pantry door, followed by a woman who was clearly trying to get out of the house. They looked in that moment as though they could be related. If Raina wasn't in a shabby dress and the woman wasn't in fancy clothes, they could be mother and daughter. This could be his and Raina's home. Suddenly, he realized that his moment of daydreaming had distracted him from the fact that the woman wasn't between him and the front door anymore. He dumped the lid as he was balancing on his head and climbed out from behind the jar. He took a deep breath and then hurried out of the pantry, sneaking towards the front door. "Hey!" The woman's voice sounded sharply behind him. He ran for the door. "Enjoy your sausage!" Raina shouted as she followed close on his heels. She threw his coat as they ran through the square, squeezing past the crowd and pushing their way into an alley on the other side. They were out of sight before the woman made it out her front door. "Whew," Raina said. "That was close. What did you get?" "Get?" he echoed, pulling on his coat. "What do you mean?" "Get," she repeated. "It was the pantry, wasn't it? What food did you take? I had to give her the sausage to get you out. It was a good sausage, too." I didn't get anything. I was too busy trying to figure out how to hide once the window closed," he admitted. Raina was quiet for a moment, but then, as she always did when he messed up, she grinned and slung an arm around his shoulders. "Doesn't matter," she said cheerfully. "We saw a puppet show today. That was pretty good." Dusk was falling, and they both knew it was time to hole up for the night. It wasn't a good idea for 12-year-olds to be out after nightfall. So they made their way over the rooftops of Hallbard until they reached a tavern near the center of town. "The Wily Wolf," the sign outside said. They had to move all over the city to scrounge up enough to stay fed, so they couldn't always make it back to the Wolf at night. But whenever they could, they did. The Wily Wolf was special. On the ground floor, it was bustling with busyness, golden lights coming on one by one, noise spilling out into the street. But it had 2 more stories above that, fairly tall for a building on Hallbard, and it was on a small hill as well. Together, they climbed up to the roof and lifted a hatch they'd found years ago, all overgrown with grass. Inside was a tiny attic, really just a space between the grassy rooftop and the flat ceiling beneath. There was no way to get to it from below, and it wasn't large enough for an adult to even sit up inside, but it was just big enough for the twins to curl up and stay warm. Anders always thought that curling up inside the roof of the Wily Wolf was as close as he could get to coming home. It was their special place, their secret. Raina wriggled down first, and Anders paused, halfway to look around and take in the view, which was quickly vanishing in the dark. Thick city walls circled Hallbard, the plains and mountains beyond lost in the dark. The rooftop meadows stretched away in every direction, and to the east of him was the glint of the sea, the masts of the ships on the harbor. Just as he was about to pull the hatch down, he heard a soft mew from nearby. He waited a few moments, and a small black shadow with bright yellow eyes slipped out of nowhere, darting down to join Raina. It was Cass, a cat that sometimes slept with him at night to keep warm. Anders pulled down the hatch on top of the 3 of them, and Raina spread the blanket over the 2 humans, Cass curling up by their feet. Anders' stomach was growling with hunger, and he was sure his sister's was too, but neither of them mentioned the lost sausage, or the fact that even surrounded by food, he hadn't thought to shove any into his pockets. Safe together in their secret spot, the evening didn't seem so bad. Still, he had to say something. "Thanks for coming to get me," he whispered. "Don't be silly," Raina whispered back. "What else was I going to do? We're a team." She wriggled one arm out from under the blankets to wrap around him. "We'll always be together, Anders. We'll always take care of each other. I promise. Right?" "I promise too," he said, because of course it was true. But as they settled down to sleep, and he lay there in the dark, waiting to drift away, he knew the truth. Raina would never need him like he needed her. And that was Chapter 1 of Ice Wolves on the 2021 Rhode Island Middle School Book Award nominee list. You want to find out what happens to Raina and Anders in their adventure? You can contact the library. We're doing curbside pickup. We can check that out too. And it's also available in eZone, where you can get it in ebook format or an audiobook format. Check out the rest of Ice Wolves, the rest of the Rhode Island Middle School Book Award nominees, and keep reading. Take care, and we'll see you soon at the library.